so today we're going to talk about decimals and percentages. This is a natural transition from what we were talking about in fractions. So, last time we talked about fractions, what I talked about with you guys was this idea of both improper fractions, and this was just yesterday, and mixed fractions. Remember, improper fractions are where the top number is bigger than the bottom number, and mixed fractions are literally a mix of numbers and fractions together. I gave you two methods, how to convert mixed to improper, and how to convert improper to mixed. So back and forth between the two types. This is just a review. We went over this yesterday. So today, what I want to talk about is how that proceeds forward. So just as a quick step back, fractions and division are the same thing. That's what fractions are. Okay, so if you remember when I talked about division back a few presentations ago, I said if you take 8 items and divide them into 4 groups, the 4 groups will each contain 2 items. Or in other words, if we write it in math terms, 8 divided by 2 is 4, or 8 divided by 4 is 2. Okay, so division is like fractions, it's separating things into parts. So division and fractions, same thing. Okay? If you even look at the division symbol, it looks like a fraction, but with 2 dots instead of numbers to mean like any number could go there. That's why the division symbol looks that way, because it's supposed to be a fraction. Okay. So when you look at a fraction, you are looking at a division question. If you write it in if you punch it in a calculator, you could punch it in like that. If you were to do it with long division, you would write it like that. But it's the same thing. Fractions are division. Division is fraction. And when you do it, you can get an answer. Okay? So if I actually punch these into a calculator, I get an answer. Like this, right? I can actually get answers. Okay? Fractions give me answers. Now, some things about that. It's called a proper fraction if when you divide it, it gets you a decimal smaller than 1. It's when you get the same 2 numbers, you get 1, and an improper fraction will give you a number greater than 1. Okay? We talked a little bit about that yesterday. I'm not going to worry too much about that. Just for those who are paying attention, you may remember that from yesterday. You may also remember this. I showed this yesterday. Okay? That if you travel fractions along a number line and then you get to 1, the fraction becomes 20 over 20. And then when you go past 1, the fraction becomes a bigger number on top and a smaller number on the bottom. Don't worry too much about that, but that's what it means. As well, we have words for that, proper and improper. In numeracy, I'm not too worried if you know those words. Notice they're not in the vocabulary. But again, as you advance into grade 9 math, math teachers are going to be using more and more complicated words. Okay, I actually reviewed some of the stuff I was doing in our numeracy class with 2 other math teachers this morning. And they made suggestions to change some of the wording. And I said, well, that wording is a little more complicated. I'd rather the kids kind of get it first before we move on. So I'm taking the math and trying to use words as simple as possible at this point. Okay? Now again, you can see these types of division questions happening there. But basically the answer is that fractions and divisions are the same thing. And as a result, we can use division to solve some of the problems of finding other ways to look at fractions. Okay. This is a simple thing, but let's just go over this. You guys count using a system. These are the numbers you use when you count. Now, you can go higher than that, but in order to go higher than this, 9, you have to use 2 of these. You have to use that one and that one to go to the next number in the sequence, 10. What you're using here is a number system based on these 10 digits. This is what we do in North America. This is called base 10 math. You use any of these 10 digits and put them together into different ways, and you create numbers. See how I do it here? 1 times 10, 10, 10 times 10, 100. I'm just using the same symbols, just putting them into different places. Okay? Fractions do this too. Okay? But with fractions, we're doing division of 10, right? So like 1 divided by 10 is the same as 1 over 10 as a fraction, which is the same as 0.1. 1 divided by 100 is 1 over 100, which is the same as 0.01, etc. So we're just kind of moving stuff around when we deal with these numbers. This is where it can start to get confusing. But if we keep it simple, we can kind of remember words like this that you probably encountered in your elementary school days. That this is the ones place, this is the tens, and this is the hundreds place. But now let's add decimals to this. With decimals, we have the 1 over tens place, the 1 over 100ths place, and the 1 over 1000ths place. Because decimals are fractions. Decimals and fractions, the same thing. And fractions are division. So all of it's the same thing. Okay, so let's go with a method now. How do I convert a fraction to a decimal? So I'm going to give you this simple way, okay? Fractions and decimals are the same thing. So it should be fairly easy how to convert them. To do it, just divide the two numbers. Do the division. If you don't want to do it by hand, use a calculator. That's what a calculator gives the advantage of doing. But I'm going to show you both ways, using a calculator and by doing it by hand. So let's get the fraction going. This is an improper fraction, 22 over 5. Doesn't matter. It could be improper or proper. If I want to convert this to a decimal, if I have a calculator, I would just punch it in. 22 divided by 5 equals 4.4. Done. I've converted that fraction to a decimal. If I don't have a calculator, or, and this happens in the grade 9 course, it tells you do not use a calculator for this section, we have to do it some other way, which I'll show you in a minute. Now, sometimes you're going to get repeating decimals like this, okay? And at that point, you can do things like round it off, okay? And by the way, calculators are weird. Some calculators will go all the way to 6, and it'll just shoot off the screen at 6. And then some calculators will end with a 7. Have any of you ever encountered a calculator like that? This is important to know, that it's important to get used to your calculator. Because your calculator itself will be sort of different. Each one is different. So get used to your calculator. All right. Now, here's the scenario where I don't have a calculator. And I've been given a problem to turn this into a decimal. For this, you have to use long division. So I'd go, okay, I'm going to rewrite this out as a long division question. So I'll write it out like this, and I'll get started on it. From your diagnostic, it showed that a lot of you have trouble doing this. So this might be something you could practice. So here's how you do it. 5 goes into 22 4 times, gives me 20. 22 minus 20, 2. Does anyone know what I would do next? See, that's a bit of a problem. So make sure you have a calculator. What I do is I bring down a 0. And I go 5 into 20 goes 20 times, or into 24 times, and my answer is 4.4. If you're not comfortable doing long division, this is all the more reason you should have a reliable calculator handy. Because that, to me, is way easier than doing the long division, especially if you don't know how to do it. Okay? I'm not here to teach you long division. I can, but it's not something I've incorporated into our unit here. Okay? Because you have an option. You can use a calculator. Okay. Now we're going to go back the other way. Now if you're given a decimal, how do I turn it back into a fraction? Which is rare. You don't usually have to do that. But here's how you do it. Okay? On those rare occasions when you have to convert a decimal back to a fraction, remember what I said just a few minutes ago about these places, ones and the decimal places. Okay? So here's a big number, 258.257. If I'm going to convert this back into a fraction, okay, I kind of need to know about these things called the places, okay? Because the method is put the decimal over the appropriate place. So let me give you an example. 0.5 is really just 5 over 10. 0.25 is really 25 over 100. 0.356 is really 356 over 1,000. It's actually not hard, but you got to know what place you're at. You have to kind of understand what that means. Now, I'm not saying that this is the simplest version of that fraction. It could be simplified. But that's not what I'm going for here. I'm just going for the conversion, converting that into that. Okay? Now, there are going to be times where you get a mix of a fraction, a decimal, and a whole number. Okay, so if you get this, don't overthink it. Just remove this part. Get rid of it. And just sort of keep it off to the side. Then remove the 0.25 part and do that fraction thing I was just saying. Turn it into a fraction and then add the 6 in later to make a mixed fraction. Done. Okay? Now you could take that mixed fraction and simplify it. You could also take that mixed fraction and convert it to an improper fraction. I've already taught you how to do those things. You have to look back maybe to do them, but that's how you do it. Okay? Last thing I want to talk about today, percentages. Good news, percentages, decimals, and fractions are all the same thing. Now, here's the thing about percentages. This is one you are not going to be able to avoid in your real life. You might be able to avoid fractions. Not if you do any kind of construction. No way. You are going to be in fractions all the time. You might be able to avoid decimals in your life, unless you handle money of any kind of point. But I doubt very highly that you will ever escape percentages. Percentages are going to hit you in the face in your real life no matter what you do. Because they're things like calculating taxes, which you have to do by law. Figuring out how much to tip someone. Figuring out whether you're getting ripped off when you're buying a car and it has like 0% financing. What does that even mean? Percentages come up in real life. A percentage is a number between 1 and 100 that uses this percent symbol after the number. Now before we go any further, if you didn't know that, what does that symbol look like? Does it look like a fraction? Because it is. That's why they made it that way. It's supposed to look kind of like a fraction, because it's also a fraction. Fractions, decimals, percentages are all the same thing. Okay. The only thing about percentages is it's a fraction that's always over 100. That's just the way it's written, okay? The symbol represents a fraction. That's why it's written that way. Okay. We get lazy as mathematicians, so we don't want to write a fraction, 75 over 100. So it's easier for just to write 75%, because we can then assume it means 75 over 100, okay? So 15% is the same as 15 over 100, or 15 parts out of the 100 total parts. The word percent even means that. This is what the word percent means. The first part of the word per means for each. Like when you say, you only get 1 cookie per person. The word per means for each. You get 1 cookie for each person. That's what per means. The second part, cent, is actually a Latin word, and it means 100. That's why, how many cents in a dollar? 100 pennies or 100 cents in a dollar. So here's some examples, right? 25% is really 25 over 100. It's a fraction. So to convert any fraction to a decimal, or pardon me, to a percentage, start by converting it to a decimal, okay? If it's a mixed fraction, or convert it to an improper fraction, if you need to. Then convert the fraction to a decimal, which I just showed you how to do. Then multiply it by 100, and you're done. You will then have a percentage. Watch. I'm going to do it right here. So I'm given this fraction, and I want to turn it to a percentage. Step 1, convert it to a decimal. To convert it to a decimal, I just do the division. Okay? So 4 divided by 5 is 0.8. Okay? I can do that on my calculator. Get her done. I was able to skip step 1 because it's not a mixed fraction and it's not an improper fraction. Or pardon me, it's not a mixed fraction. If it's a mixed fraction, I'm going to need to do step 1, but I don't need to do it here. So now I got 0.8. What do I do next? Step 3. Multiply this times 100, and I get 80, and then just slap the percent sign on. It works for any fraction, any single fraction. Let's try this one. 2/3. 2 divided by 3 is 0.6, repeating. Okay? 0.6 times 100 equals 66.666666, or 66.66666%. At some point you could round that off, but I didn't say you needed to do that, okay? Here's a couple other ones that might come up. 1 over 100 is really 1%. 1 over 2 is really 50%, okay? 12 over 4 is 240% because it's an improper fraction, right? The top number is bigger than the bottom number. But the process is the same. 12 divided by 4 is 2.4. 2.4 times 100 is 240. Add the percent symbol. 2 3/4, that's a mixed fraction. So what I would probably want to do with this one is convert it first into an improper fraction, which would be 11 over 4. Divide it and come up with 275%. Okay? The methods are tried and true. They work. Okay. Now, if you have to go back from a percentage to a fraction or back to a decimal, just divide it by 100. Don't multiply it by 100. Divide it by 100. And then, if necessary, convert it to a fraction. Watch. 56 divided by 100 equals 0.56. 0.56 is really 56 over 100. 1% is really 1 divided by 100, which is 0.01, which is really 1 over 100. 250% is really 250 divided by 100, which is 2.5, which is really 250 over 100, or you could write it as 2 and 5 over 10. There are a couple ways you could do that one. All right, let's wrap it up. So, all I said to you today that you need to take away is that decimals, fractions, and percentages are all the same thing. They're written differently, but they really mean the same thing. I've given you 4 methods today. 1, to convert a fraction to a decimal, do a division. Actually, do the division. To convert a decimal to a fraction, you place the fraction over its place, knowing the place order. To convert a fraction, or a decimal, to a percent, convert a mixed fraction if necessary, convert the fraction to a decimal by dividing, and then multiply by 100. And by the way, these 2 steps might not be necessary if it's already a decimal. Okay? To convert a percentage to a decimal, divide by 100. So either multiply or divide when going one way or the other. And that's it. Okay? All right. Now,